This topic is going to be a little weird. I just want to open up with that, and it's basically our comic fans themselves just kind of difficult to have a conversation with. Now, hear me out. Hear me out. I think that if there's one thing that's true, and I'm casting my mind back to like the '80s, the '90s, these conversations I had in a shop with other people. There was no internet involved. There was just human face-to-face interaction, and comic fans tend to be very opinionated people. And so, is it a big surprise that when things translate over to the internet and social media and places that kind of amplify disagreements in some cases, that you have, well, disagreements? Maybe this isn't so weird. Hey everybody, this is Perch. Some people in the comments were saying, "Hey, you do a lot of videos from the car. Like, how much do you spend on gas?" Well, I commute. I do my various tasks, my jobs, and I can jump in the car. I've got a system that I think would not work for a lot of other people. Some people have asked for some tips on how to do videos and everything else. First off, I don't think I'm the right person to go to. You want one of those people who's got like 50,000 plus subs. I mean, I'm just slowly trucking along. YouTube makes no sense to me in that I'll go and I'll have a couple days where I get like 100 plus subscribers in a day. And it's not like there's any kind of crazy video or news doing that. And then a week will go by and I'm getting like 5, 10, and I have no idea why the up and down. It just makes no sense. But regardless, um, I promise I'm not in the car that much, but I jump in. It's like a 10, 15-minute trip from here to, home to Target or whatever else. I do a video, I park, I go. And I would benefit a lot. You'd hear a lot less ums because this is all like off the cuff. I get in the car and I'm like, I wonder what I want to talk about. And I just start talking. And that's the magic that you're getting. So, yeah, there you have it. But what got me was, I have discussions and I don't have nearly enough time to respond to everything in the comment section. I wish I did. And even worse, a lot of people have sent mails and I see them in there and I'm slowly getting overwhelmed by email. So I need to answer because you guys write like detailed, thought provoking stuff. If you wrote stuff like, you know, I like Deadpool, yeah, that's much easier to respond to. But when it's a long, thoughtful mail, I feel like I want to give it a long, thoughtful response, and then a month goes by. So not good. I admit. I'm sorry. I really am. I need to get better about that. Anyway, but I've noticed in the comments when we get into disagreements, and generally we don't. There's not that many disagreements, but what's been really prevalent over the last, I would say, 2.5 years or so, and it's true on Reddit, it's true on Twitter, it's true on Facebook, it's true on any kind of message board. There's this kind of very aggressive mode of like fans who like to argue, and and sometimes it gets a label, the toxic fan, the this or the that, but it's just people who like to argue, and then sometimes that splinters into Ivy stands or Comicsgate or any of these kind of groups, right? That go into where a group of people have the same opinion and they argue, and then the arguments start to happen more about the group than whatever they're arguing about in the first place. This is my big frustration with all sides. At least with the Poison Ivy stands, it makes a little bit more sense. It's like I like Poison Ivy or I don't like Poison Ivy. It's pretty binary there. It's easier to digest. With Comicsgate, it's a little tougher because the argument rarely is about comics. And before you jump all over my throat over this, what I mean by that is when people go after kind of the mean Comicsgate people, and so on, they're not. The conversations are rarely about the topics that are actually getting brought up, like around. I get that like creator behavior is a tough nut to argue because there's different standards for that behavior. But other topics like price too expensive, paper quality too cheap, direct market bad, marketing bad, all those kinds of topics, those are tangible. You could have a good argument about those and you could debate different points. But mostly it's the debate are the Comicsgate people bad or not? Which to me is a little, as a group, a little bit more irrelevant of an argument. I mean, you can have it, but there's no in game there. I think if you're in the position where you believe that group is, then you've kind of made up your mind. There is no debate. it's just these arguments are kind of pointless. And I wish they would go more toward the topic at hand. Now, what's interesting is whenever I discuss this, I usually get some mail saying you're too nice to Comicsgate. They're bad people. You should hate them, or you have a bee in your bonnet about Comicsgate. It's like you can't even discuss the topic anymore without that kind of nonsense. But abstracting from that, taking a giant step backward for a moment from all of this, um, comic fans like to argue. They kind of always have. I've told the story before about the guy who believed that DC, Marvel won the rights to the Silver Surfer, and they kind of stole him through shenanigans, and that obviously factually not true. But this guy was determined. He would argue, and he'd be annoying about it. He would just dig his heels in, and anybody who argued with him, he would roll out. That's why, by the way, in the comments, if you ever hear me kind of roll my eyes at the term straw man, I've just had too many people throw that like, oh, you're doing a straw man argument, and they don't really know what they mean. And it's just to me, it's like these words are always like I can't come up with a good defense of your debate, so I'm going to say things like straw man or sea lioning or uh, conflating is another one, or gaslighting. Whenever somebody throws out these terms, it to me it usually means I don't know how to argue with you. So here's a term that makes me sound kind of clever. I know not everybody uses it that way, so please don't everybody get pissed at once. But in the shop, there'd be this guy who'd be like, "Oh, that's a straw man. That's a straw man." Like you could say, Silver Surfer used to be a DC character and then was sold to Marvel. It's like, no, not at all. In fact, here's the proof of where the character first appeared. Look, it's a Marvel comic. It's like, oh, you're straw manning me. It's like, wait, what? No, we're showing you the comic. You're making no sense whatsoever. And I think that years of having those kinds of arguments have maybe either jaded me or protected me a little bit, one or the other, through this whole thing. And I think that it causes me to go into these arguments with less, emotion in a lot of cases. I watch a lot of people get really bent out of shape when comic fans argue about things. They just really, they like lose their temper and they get really heated. And kind of on top of that, the various social dynamics have been going on since 2016, where that emotion is even higher. It just people come into it and they're automatically assuming there's something very personal and it's a plot and all the rest, and it just makes it very very difficult to have any conversations. But this has kind of always been comic fans. Again, you go to the 90s and you get bitter arguments over X-Men or Teen Titans or Marvel or DC, or the Image guys are traitors for leaving Marvel, or no, they're not. They're bravely steering a new path. I mean, this is kind of the nature of comic books, and certainly comic shop conversations. So now that we're online, I watch, and often, I mean, it can be all different people, but I'll watch pros like kind of jump all over, like, the angry fan who's coming in and, mouthing off to Eric Larson because he's got boobs in his comic. And it's like, but, Mr. Larson, you were around in the 90s. You remember, yeah, you were in the 80s. You have to remember that this is how people argued all the time. Or is it that, a lot of creative professionals, they work from their homes or their studios and they draw this stuff out and they just never saw this? If not, then let me put your mind to rest, because I see like Kurt Busiek on Twitter was really like kind of waving his arms around about how, people were really mean and just like they wouldn't listen to sense, and it worries him, and I've heard other creators, I think Tom King, although I may be wrong about that. It feels wrong actually now that I'm saying it, but creators online have talked about, going to cons and worrying about meeting that kind of crazy obsessive fan. And I guess I'm here to tell you that that crazy obsessive fan has always been there. Like, talk to some of the people who are doing cons or signings back in the late 80s. They will tell you, like, the lunatic fan has always been there. And so, and they're not really lunatics. They're just like, they're passionate. Lunatic is the wrong word. I shouldn't have used it. It's just these people are really committed to this hobby, and comics encourages that. Comics encourages people to get really wound up and really involved and invested in what it is that they're collecting, they're buying. That's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a strength that publishers in the comic industry has harnessed for decades to, get people who are collectors, to get people to spend the $2, $3, $5, whatever it happens to be on comics they don't even like because they just want to continue their run. That kind of commitment or obsession, whatever you want to call it, is very much part of comics. So when you see people online, I get that it's a little different because now these people are coming into your home. And if you didn't spend a lot of time in a comic shop, or maybe you were already, quote unquote famous, and so when you went into a comic shop, you didn't have comic fans mouthing off to you and saying crazy things. That may be, but it's not like this is a new thing. And if it's not a new thing, then we don't need to be scared of it. We don't need to harass it. Because I think when you come in there and you start throwing things around like the fans are all insane and look at them, these obsessive weirdos and everything else, nobody likes to be called an obsessive weirdo, let alone all the other labels that get tossed around like, bigot and Nazi and all the rest of that kind of stuff. People tend to not like that. And if you've just got somebody who's very committed to comics and you start throwing those labels at them, you're going to turn that commitment, that obsession, if you want to label it that, into some hatred. And that's not healthy for anyone, especially if this is just a normal part of comics. Now, it's worth the caveating that saying, yes, are there some people out there who just, can't stand to see women in comics unless they're wearing a bikini, or they don't want any women working in comics unless they're serving coffee, or they don't want anything but white male heroes. Are there some of those people out there? I'm sure that there are. I'm sure there are. But I think that amount is really small, like really, really, really small. I think, like I've done other videos, I think sometimes when people complain about a comic because it reads stupid or it's not to their taste, maybe they could word it differently. Maybe they could word it as hey, this comic wasn't for me, but it's for somebody else, and I'm just not going to buy it anymore. But I wish the creators and the comic well. I hope it finds its audience. That's a really nice way to say something. You could also say it of this comic is woke trash, and I won't be buying anymore. You won't get my dollars, jerks. That's a less nice way of saying it. But it kind of means the same thing. And if you're a creator or a publisher, it means exactly the same thing. You're probably not getting money from that person. The end. It doesn't need to be more dramatic than that. And so and that last statement, it doesn't need to be more dramatic than that. If somebody is awkward and says things in a stupid way or insensitive way or a mean way, then the correct response is not to double down and be a bigger dick in response. That's just going to keep the brawl going. You wouldn't do that in real life. You probably wouldn't do that at con. And so, two facts. Take heart. One, maybe, and by the way, in the comments, disagree with me if I'm wrong. Maybe the fans have kind of always been committed like this, and this is nothing new. It's just now showing up online, and in an echo chamber kind of environment of social media, it gets amplified. But the core behavior is the same it's always been. True, not true? I think true. And then the second piece is because it's always been there, maybe it's, we don't have to look at this like an emerging, violent, terrible, awful threat, and more like, hey, you know what? Some people struggle at expressing themselves and they do it badly. I mean, for that matter, no offense here, but having been to a lot of cons, having met a lot of creators do a poor job expressing themselves too. These are people who work from home in a lot of cases, and social skills aren't like, top of the list. Let's just leave it there. Okay. So, maybe these things don't have to be so catastrophic. Again, just if we've been through this before, it should take some of the edge off of it. And that's kind of my hope, is that we can recognize, hey, some of this stuff is not new. And because it's not new, that doesn't mean it's scary. And also, we've dealt with this before. We've figured it out in the past. So, we can figure it out again in the future. I don't know. Half-baked theory, crazy. You let me know in the comments below. Let me have it. As always, if I'm full of crap, bring it on. Tell me I'm straw manning and whatever else you want to say. That's fine. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. Follow me on social media if you are so inclined. But most importantly, thanks for listening.